And welcome back, fellow American patriots and Minutemen, standing at the ready to fight anew for the issues that matter here on this Friday, February 6th at Blaze TV. Your host, Daniel Horowitz, back here today to discuss some of those issues that matter. We've talked a lot about the Trump surrender on immigration, on the insurrection, on judicial supremacism throughout the week. But then there's the whole other half of this, which is the economy, which is really what's going to propel Democrats into power. That we are losing, as conservatives, we're losing power on economic policies that we don't even believe in, on Trump embracing the current economy as his own, as if it's a good thing, as if it's a golden era where the only thing that's gold is the doubling of gold price, but everything else is permanent debt-driven stagflation, meaning endless high prices and joblessness until the eyes could see. So we're going to have on Peter Schiff. We've had him on 2 weeks ago. There's so much going on with the volatility of the markets, the tech stocks, the stock market's finally going down. That was the last shoe to drop. And there's just tons of volatility in the commodity markets. You have Bitcoin is collapsing in front of us. And then we've had finally, we all knew it was impossible to get a job, especially for a first-time job seeker or really for even a older person that's laid off. But now it's starting to show up in the data. So I want to get to that as well as a couple of things before we bring on Peter. Obviously, like and subscribe our YouTube channel, Horowitz Show, our Substack, Daniel Horowitz at Liberating Truths. So we now know why the feds, the Labor Department, skipped the BLS employment report for today on Friday, because the ADP numbers that came out for January show that basically everything except for healthcare, garbage, government-driven sector, basically creating jobs off of making Americans permanently sick, and a grifting third-party payer, fourth-party payer system where it's basically taken up by insurance bureaucrats rather than doctors. Aside from that, everything else is in a recession. Manufacturing, again, contracted by 8,000 jobs. Professional business services jobs contracted by 57,000 in January. Education and healthcare was the only thing that grew. Companies with 20 to 49 employees, the sort of backbone of the small businesses that used to propel America's independent wealth, they contracted jobs in January for the fifth consecutive month. The JOLT report shows that job openings in December cratered to 6.5 million, down from 7.1 million. We also have the highest number of layoffs since the Great Recession. U.S. companies announced over 108,000 layoffs. That's the largest number of job cuts for any January since the Great Recession 2009, according to the Challenger report. At the same time, companies announced their intention to hire just 5,300 new people, the lowest on record since 2009. Gee, now would be the best time to probably put a moratorium on foreign students and foreign workers, particularly Chinese students. But of course, we doubled the H-2B cap. So we're going to get into that as well as the markets, Bitcoin, dollar devaluation, what's going on with gold and silver, the debt-based economy, AI, and big tech software companies crashing. We'll get into all of that with Peter Schiff. I also want to get into the nominee for Federal Reserve Chair, Kevin Warsh. Just a couple of things before we do that to just clear the decks. I want to promote, this is not political at all, exposingfoodtoxins.com. So this is the project of the Florida Department of Health under the stewardship of First Lady Casey DeSantis and Surgeon General Latipo, where they are doing what, frankly, the FDA should have been doing or should do regularly, and they're testing critical things in the food supply for food toxins. They've already done this with candy, different chocolate bars, and formula for babies. I mean, my gosh, you don't want to be putting toxins in them. And they found heavy metals, but it's not in all of them. So it's important that consumers know. So now they've tested different types of bread you could see here. And some of them have glyphosate at dangerous levels, but a few of them don't. So again, I mean, why are we putting Roundup weed killer, a poison, in our freaking bread? But this is what happens when you have regulatory capture, when the federal government boxes out anything private, says, look, I got it, we got it, we got it. We're going to test for safety. So then everyone relies on it, and then they fall down on the job. And we wonder why we have a generation of chronic illness in this country. Well, that's why. So anyway, this is really a public service that the Florida Department of Health is doing, exposingfoodtoxins.com. Check it out, and hopefully they'll put out more stuff on more types of food. So this is certainly important. Just a couple of other things on immigration to close out the week before getting back to the economy. New Mexico's legislature just passed a bill that bans local government from joining 287G programs and from hosting detention centers. In addition, in Virginia, remember, they just took over the governorship and the legislature. They don't waste a minute. So first of all, they created an 11-to-1 congressional map. Just one Republican left, eliminated 3 Republican seats. So Republicans are going to lose in that whole redistricting thing. Pathetic. But anyway, Spanberger, the governor, and by the way, she ran as a centrist. This is what the most moderate Democrats are like. What are they like? What's the most moderate Democrat like? Spanberger announced that she is freeing convicted criminal aliens into your communities, blocking ICE from arresting prison inmates, basically requiring judicial warrants to arrest illegal aliens. That is against federal law. And in general, 8 U.S.C. 1373 prohibits states or local governments from restricting communication with DHS regarding immigration status. And she's like, screw it. We're going to do what we want. Folks, that is what a blue state does. But moreover, why is it that Trump is not using all of his political capital to say he is going to force a talking filibuster to pass the remaining DHS bill, not just for the SAVE Act, but what is much more fundamental, to end sanctuary cities and to end judicial supremacism? And by the way, another activist judge, Indira Talwani, this is the same judge who, by the way, said that Congress cannot cut off funding to Planned Parenthood, said that the IRS can't use taxpayer information to find illegals for deportation. So you see that that is really the fulcrum to getting to the bottom of the issue, as I mentioned earlier this week. But what is the administration going to do? They're going to listen to that? And again, I don't want to hear, oh, the Supreme Court will reverse it. You can't have the remaining 3 years where any district judge could grind things to a halt. Let me give you a sense of how you can't litigate your way out of this. You can't comply your way out of judicial supremacism, because Bill Glahn reports that he has now reached, working for ICE, 700 habeas corpus cases in Minnesota in just 1 month. So that's one filed every hour, every day. There's even a case where a Minnesota federal judge is demanding the return of an illegal who's self-deported to Mexico on his own. So this is continuing. There's no way you can get around this. Every fiber of Trump's political capital should be spent on the bully pulpit demanding members of Congress codify and must-pass bills, a ban on sanctuary cities, a ban on sanctuary judges, defunding these court cases, and reinstating what is already in the INA. But what is the president's focus? Tweeting out some picture of Barack Obama looking like a monkey, and he wants his name on Dulles and Penn Station. Literally, he's negotiating with Chuck Schumer a deal to get his name on Penn Station. That's where his focus is. And this is a security threat to our prerogatives because Schumer knows he could buy him off with utter sophistry, like naming stations after Trump, rather than the meat and potatoes of immigration policy. So this is what we're expending our political capital on. It truly is unbelievable. But folks, this is why we're not fulfilling the mandate. So meanwhile, Trump is like, yeah, we're going to give up on going after blue states. They're doing what they want. The courts are doing what they want. Deportations are being ground to a halt. And meanwhile, on the economy, everything he does is inflationary, socialist. Oh, what's the Congress going to focus on next week? You want to talk about a uniparty? The Senate passed it unanimously. Elizabeth Warren's housing bill is in the House next week. So rather than Trump pressuring the rhinos to ban judicial supremacism, to ban sanctuary cities, he's going to pressure conservatives to take another one for the team and vote for this bill that increases all the HUD Section 8 programs to build even more houses when we don't have a shortage problem. That is not the problem. So we're going to continue with zero interest rates. We're going to continue with Federal Reserve and HUD policies that juice up the bubble, create interest rate traps, inflationary pressure. Oh, but it's a supply problem, and build even more houses, subsidize even more people who can't afford mortgages, rather than letting the market settle on its own. So Elizabeth Warren's presidential campaign platform housing bill is now coming before the GOP Congress. That is the priority here. And all the while, we are going to get crushed on the economy, crushed in the elections. All Republicans, even the few good ones, will wind up getting punished for this. But we're not even dying on our own hills, on our own policies. Frankly, most of them are policies that are antithetical to what we believe in. So with that, I want to get to Peter Schiff and the economy, the stock market, financial markets, and the imminent collapse. So folks, 10 years ago, the MAGA movement arose in part because they were sick of the forgotten American being shafted by permanent debt, permanent inflation, a fake economy where everything is fake and inflationary, designed to promote a handful of domestic and really foreign special interests with, spending that increases and juices up the markets, builds asset bubbles, but nothing tangible for most Americans. And if you look at what has been going on the past year, literally everything both parties, but including this administration, is pushing, whether it's now this new housing bill to inflate housing, subsidize more housing, cars, subsidize auto loans, even the tax cuts were bizarre and inflationary, all designed to subsidize high prices and give credits and subsidies for people to pay unaffordable levels of pricing, rather than doing things to bring down the debt-based economy and the pricing. So what are we left with? Record public debt, record private debt. Now, this week, you have crazy volatility in the markets. The stock market was the big thing Trump cared about, but that's finally, having its day of reckoning. Everything was AI, but it wasn't AI production and revenue. It was spending and debt, unproductive debt. Well, now every time, it used to be when they announced unproductive debt last year, the stock valuations for the Mag 7 would go up. Now Amazon lost 10, 15% when they announced they're going to spend another $200 billion, because Wall Street knows they don't have it. We don't have the power for this data center stuff anyway, even if it was useful. And meanwhile, we're seeing a lot of volatility in the precious metals as well. Here with us to unpack this and more, backed by popular demand, very popular demand, Peter Schiff of Schiff Gold, Euro Pacific, to discuss this and so much more. Hey, Peter. It feels like it's been years, but it was only 2 weeks since I had you back, and look at what's happened since then. Welcome back.
Sure. We just did this 2 weeks ago. Shows you
It was like we were celebrating silver at 100, gold at 5,000. Well, gold is holding the 5,000. We've had a bit of a correction. I want to start off with the market this week. The S&P 1500 software index basically took a haircut of 30%.
Mhm.
Bitcoin now erased the entirety of its post-Trump bounce. Gold and silver corrected a little bit, but gold is still up 170% since 2021, with Bitcoin now up 0% since then. What's your overall take of what this past week is telling us?
Well, there was certainly a big correction in gold and silver, particularly silver. Where had the one day it was down $30. When and it got as high as 121, and then it pulled back to 67 last night. I think it got as low as, and it's recovered off those lows. I think it's in the mid 70s again, and gold is just under 5,000. Gold got over 5,500, over 5,550 actually, and I think there was a coordinated attack on the metals, and I think the Trump administration was involved. I think they were getting very nervous about the implications of gold and silver prices rising that rapidly and what it might portend for the dollar, for the bond market. And I think they needed to do something. And I think that they recognized that one of the problems was the perception of a loss of independence of the Fed, and that the new Fed governor would really be a puppet of Trump. And I think they wanted to push back on that as well, which is, I think that's why they framed the Walsh nomination as somehow being indicative of Trump, like making a surprise pick
Yep.
of a guy that was really independent, that was an inflation hawk, that may start hiking rates, right? And, which is complete nonsense, but that's how he was framed. And I think they coordinated that with a lot of short selling in the metals, and that that took some of the air out of the sails. We'll see. I do think that we're making new highs. We'll see how long it takes, but I think that the mining stocks will make more new highs before the metals themselves. I think they're going to recover and start to anticipate that gold prices are not only not going down, which is what's currently priced into these stocks, but that they're going to continue to rise. And I think the main reason that you're seeing the strength in gold is because the world is moving away from the US dollar. I think that's already a decision that's been made, and it's just playing out. We gave them a lot of extra incentives to do what they should have done on their own years ago. And now they're doing it. And it's a major change for the global economy. And for the U.S., it's going to be a big problem. I think for the rest of the world, it's going to be a relief. And there could be an economic boom outside the United States. At the same time, there is an economic bust happening here in the United States.
So the big thing we've been seeing with the stagflation this week is that we always knew prices were high. And even off of that record plateau, they keep going up. The PPI was above 3% again from these record baseline levels. But as far as the labor market, on paper, it appeared strong, even though no one felt it. And everyone knows that youngsters can't get jobs. But then we had this slew of terrible jobs data with a lack of new hires, layoffs. Could you explain to the public how stagflation happens? Meaning, typically, if people can't find jobs, they don't have money. If the money ain't there, you can't charge it. So prices have to come down. How is it? And what are the mechanisms government is doing that makes pricing so high despite a terrible economy and job market?
Yeah. Yeah, and we got really bad data. We got the Challenger layoff announcements. It was the most in any January since 2009. And 2009 wasn't a random January. That was in the 2008 financial crisis. All right. So this is the worst or the most amount of layoffs announced in any January that was not part of the 2008 financial crisis. The JOLTS numbers, there was a big drop in job openings, not only in the current month, but they revised the prior month's number lower. And a pretty big increase in the weekly unemployment claims. So across the board, we had a lot of weak information. And that really flies in the face of not only the Fed's claim that we have a strong labor market, but Donald Trump's claim that we have the strongest economy in the history of the world. Because it seems a little odd that the economy would be that strong and the labor market would be this weak. So something's not right there. But as far as stagflation, a lot of people don't understand that you can have rising prices in a weak economy. And in fact, economic weakness is more likely to cause higher prices than alleviate them. You know, it's if you have a strong economy that's productive and producing a lot of goods, that can reduce prices because you have more productivity, more output, you have more abundance of things. But if the economy is weak and producing less output, then prices would be higher, regardless of, you know, whether or not people have jobs and can afford to buy. But what's also more significant is that people forget that we live in a global economy. And just because demand is down here doesn't mean demand is down everywhere. And so if we get a weak dollar, which I believe we're going to get, and goods become more expensive for Americans, and so we buy fewer goods, the same goods become less expensive for everybody else, so they buy more. So what ends up happening is more of the goods that might have been or were imported in the United States will never get here. Those goods will be consumed outside the United States by customers who can pay more than we can. And so what that means is the supply of goods for sale is lower in the U.S. So even if the demand is down because people don't have jobs or they can't get loans, the supply of goods has also come down. And prices can go way up, and which is what I expect. So we're going to have the worst of both worlds in the U.S. We're going to have a weak economy, but we're not going to get the relief that we may otherwise expect when it comes to inflation. So we're going to have high unemployment and high inflation, which is something that we had during the 1970s. That's when they kind of came up with the term stagflation, because prior to the 70s, the Keynesians didn't even think that such a condition was possible. So they didn't really have a name for it. But when they got surprised by it, they came up with the term. But I think what we're going to have now is going to be a lot worse than what we had then, you know, on both fronts. So I think the economy is going to be worse, yet inflation is going to be even higher. You know, and we don't even measure it the same way. So it's apples to oranges. We don't have the same CPI that we used back then. I mean, that was a much more honest way to measure price increases than what we use today.
And the debt was nothing like what we're dealing with. And this is the thing, both at the governmental and then corporate level, we're measuring all of our success, like you said, not that we're having more output. Manufacturing's been in a recession, despite all these, you know, stratagems to bolster our exports. At the end of the day, we're not producing real stuff. It's all fake things. It was crypto this, data centers, AI this, but it wasn't productivity. It was all unproductive debt. The government going into debt to juice up private debt. And then you're left with a debt-driven economy where everything's inflationary. I want to play a clip from Trump when he was asked about the dollar roughly hovering around a 10% drop since he's become president. And both the president and the Treasury Secretary have been saying that is a good thing. I just want people to listen to this.
The dollar, do you think it's declined too much?
No, I think it's great. I mean, the value of the dollar. Look at the business we're doing. No, dollar's doing great.
You want to see it decline?
You know, it's very interesting. If you look at China and Japan, I used to fight like hell with them because they always wanted to devalue their yen. You know that? The yen and the yuan. And they'd always want to devalue it. They devalue. And I said, not fair that you devalue because it's hard to compete when they devalue. But they always fought, no, our dollar's very.
All right, Peter. So he's saying our dollar is very good. This is a good thing that it's devalued because it will bolster exports.
Yeah, well, it's complete nonsense because obviously if the dollar goes down, Americans are poorer. You know, one of the things we're all talking about now is affordability. And the Democrats and the Republicans are arguing over who's at fault here. But they admit that things are unaffordable. We have an affordability crisis. Well, the reason that people can't afford things is because the dollars that they earn and save don't buy as much. And so as your currency loses value, you need more and more units of that currency to buy stuff. And if you don't have the more additional units, well, you just can't afford it. And so it's not a good thing that Americans are getting poorer. And, you know, now he says, well, we get to sell more. That may be true. We get to sell more because our stuff is cheaper. But does that actually mean we're better off? I mean, any store, if you have a business, you could lower your prices. You'll always sell more stuff if you just cut your prices. But, you know, is that really the goal? What you know, you want to maximize your profits. You'd rather not have to put all your stuff on sale. But what he's saying is, hey, we're going to mark down our exports. And because we mark down our exports, we'll export more. Yes, but we're going to earn fewer yen, fewer RMB or fewer euros or whatever. And what a lot of people don't get and what Trump doesn't get is exporting is not a goal. It is a means to an end. The reason you export is to pay for your imports. Now, we haven't really had to do that because we just print money to pay for our imports because we have the reserve currency, but that's going away. But to the extent that a weak dollar means that we sell more, it also means that we earn fewer units of currency of our trading partners. So we can't import as much for what we've exported. So it means we work harder, but we get less because what you get from exports are imports. And if you end up with lower imports for your exports, it's a bad deal. It's a good deal for the other country who can sell us less and get more.
Yes.
Because the purpose isn't, hey, we want to export so we can have jobs. Jobs, again, are a means to an end. I mean, some people really enjoy their jobs and maybe they would do it for free. But most people look forward to the weekend, right? They don't look forward to Monday. They go to work because they want to earn the money that allows them to buy the things that they enjoy. And so we don't export so we can have the jobs. we export so that the people can have the goods that we import as a result of those exports, right? That and the reason people export is because of comparative advantage. It's we recognize that there are things that we don't produce sufficiently, and there are other things that we do. And rather than being a jack of all trades, if we specialize in what we do good, and then we trade with other nations, everybody wins. Like that's Ricardo. That's comparative
and then, Peter,
advantage.
the other thing is, even for the exporters, there are very few things that we make A to Z, all the raw materials here. So they have to import too. So inflationary pressure, devaluation of the dollar harms the exporters in terms of the manufacturing because the input that goes into their product gets more expensive. I love the way you explained it. with
Yeah,
the
when the dollar goes down and raw material costs go up, that's a negative for us. For other people who have the strengthening currency, those raw material costs go down. But also, there's another thing, because Donald Trump always likes to talk about interest rates and we should have low interest rates. Well, when you have a strong currency, you get lower interest rates because lenders know that when they get repaid, it's with a currency that is strengthened. When you have a weakening currency, you have to pay higher interest rates. So while Donald Trump is celebrating dollar weakness, a weak dollar and the perception that it will continue to weaken drives up our cost of capital. Lenders are going to demand higher rates of interest to loan us money. So, that's a negative. That reduces our competitiveness because now our businesses have to pay more to borrow. So it's all nonsense. It's very short-sighted thinking to just think it's an advantage to have a weak currency. And if that was true, anybody can have a weak currency. Any government can just crank up the printing presses. So if you gained something from weakening your currency, right? Why wasn't Argentina, booming before? Why wasn't Zimbabwe? I mean, they weakened the hell out of their currency. Why weren't they just, an economic boom over there? No, I mean, the key is to have a strong currency, which is not easy. There you have to do the right things to get,
and I love
it's
how
the
you talk
difference
about
between, it's much harder to get straight A's than to just flunk every class. I mean, flunking is easy. Just don't show up, don't do the work, and you're going to get an F. Real simple. But getting A's, you got to do the work, you got to study, that takes more effort.
Yep. No, it's the thing about the point you made that it's a means, not an end. Trump is obsessed with the process of, okay, we need tariffs, we need low dollar to bolster exports. But rather than looking at the fundamentals of economic growth and manufacturing, where you can't resurrect the dead through these means. You can't have a venture socialist economy with endless debt crowding out investment, government favors for big tech, labor unions, welfare state, educational problems. Oh, but then we'll just slap on tariffs and devalue the dollar and voila, you'll resurrect, output. And that's why, isn't it true, Peter, that we've had a recession the past year in manufacturing with all of these supposed policies that should have bolstered it.
Yeah, well, again, the tariffs are making our manufacturers less competitive for the reasons that you mentioned, where their imported components are now more expensive. But also, when tariffs drive up prices, so let's say, okay, we have steel tariffs, and that drives up steel prices, and that does favor some domestic steel producers, but it also ends up reducing demand for steel. It ends up hurting American car manufacturers who now have to buy more expensive steel. So we start, shrinking the market for steel. So ultimately, even U.S. steel companies end up suffering because their customers go bankrupt because of the higher price of steel. So all this stuff backfires. And, if tariffs were a magic bullet, if you could just, get all this free money from the rest of the world, then every country would just have high tariffs, right? Why tax yourself when you can tax everybody else? But it doesn't work. The best thing that a country can do is have no tariffs at all, and just allow free competition. That's the best thing. But, tariffs can work as a way to raise revenue because governments need to raise revenue. And if they're just kind of across the board and not very high, you can use them as a way to raise revenue.
Especially when you don't have an income tax, you don't have a ton of debt, but Trump wants it all. He wants the welfare state. He wants the deficit spending, the endless debt. But then he wants the low value dollar, the zero interest rates. And like you said, he doesn't understand the mutual exclusivity of his own propositions. It's like he wants housing prices high and low at the same time. That's another thing.
Well, he doesn't want them low. He wants to make high house prices affordable because he doesn't want to disrupt the wealth of the people who own houses, but he wants people to be able to buy houses at those inflated prices. He doesn't want to let prices come down to a level that's commensurate with the market.
Wow.
He wants to maintain the fiction that a house is worth $700,000 when it's really only worth $400,000. And so what he wants to do is somehow enable somebody to pay $700,000 for a $400,000 house so that the seller can get the money. And so the only way to do that is with artificially low interest rates, which can only be brought about by creating massive inflation, and lower lending standards, lower down payments. I mean, all kinds of ways to try to inflate demand, to keep the air in the housing bubble.
Inflating demand to match the ridiculous prices. That's exactly what's driving me nuts, because next week the House is bringing up Elizabeth Warren's housing bill, which is backed by the White House, that takes every single FHA HUD stupid program designed to subsidize unaffordability and people who can't afford mortgages and build more supply, more to match the record high prices rather than bringing them down. I want to get to, before we run out of time, there's another thing you said recently on X that really struck me, because you're the only one who's had the guts to say this. So all last year I complained that, look, you had one bill, one reconciliation bill to use your electoral capital. What's it going to be? Fulfill your mandate, repeal Obamacare, repeal the welfare state, bring down inflation, or on immigration, ban sanctuary cities, whatever, something that's significant. So it was this tax cut bill, but no one even understands what's in it. And it was this bizarre assortment of, okay, no taxes on tips, reduction on seniors, no taxes on overtime, tax credit for auto loans, more debt, Trump accounts, kind of like this European style thing where you give everyone $1,000 when they're born. You said that aside from this just being bizarre and weird use of capital, they're going to be not pro-growth and inflationary, unlike Trump 2017. Explain what you mean with that.
Yeah. So all Trump did is reduce taxes on people who are just going to go spend their higher after-tax income on consumer goods. Right? It's not a tax cut that's designed to increase economic growth. It's not something that's going to result in more investment and more production and more economic growth and more hiring or any of that. It's not a supply side type of a tax cut. It's cutting taxes on tips. Well, when you cut taxes on tips, I mean, what is the impact? Well, waiters and waitresses and bartenders are just going to have more money to spend. They're not going to be working any harder. They're not more productive. They're just going to have a little bit more money. What are they going to do with it? They're just going to spend it. But they're not producing anything. They're just spending more. Same thing when you reduce taxes on Social Security. What are the 70 or 80-year-olds
They're retired.
Going to do? Yeah, I mean, they're just going to spend more money. Now you could argue that maybe if overtime is a little bit less tax, people might be more incentivized to work those extra hours.
But car loans is the perfect example of what you're talking about with housing, that cars are to record high. So we're like, rather than bringing down prices, let's subsidize on affordability and more debt.
Yeah, but it's all a Keynesian style, demand driven stimulus. Let's just stimulate more demand at a time where inflation is already a big problem. And you're saying we need to bring down inflation. And now you're just stimulating demand. And what happens is now the government collects less in taxes, but it hadn't cut any spending. In fact, spending went up. So the bill drives up the deficits. So we have more deficit spending by the government, more spending by consumers. Nothing in there results in more production. So we don't have more goods. We just have more demand for the goods that we have coming from the private sector, coming from the government. So it's a highly inflationary bill that, any Democrat could have passed that. I mean, they don't need the Republicans to just have across the board tax cuts. And it's not, the only time that tax cuts would grow the economy, let's say you reduce the marginal rate of tax. If you have a very high marginal rate and you reduce that, and it may incentivize people to work and be more productive if they get to keep more of the marginal income. But it wasn't like geared towards that. It was just, going towards the blue collar, middle class, high propensity to spend, right? If you cut taxes, I guess, on the rich, at least they might take the tax cuts and invest it. They'll have more money to invest. It's investment that grows the economy. And I'm not talking about gambling, like
it's
making meme
counterintuitive
coins.
because the blue collar pay more in the cost of living, which is driven by these debt policies, than they do in taxes. They don't pay that much in taxes. They pay it in the cost of living. So you produce a bill that gives them some change, but then on net creates more debt, creates more inflation. I never understood the use of capital. And to your point, by the way, the Democrats supported some of that stuff in standalone bills.
Yeah.
It was a complete joke that they had to use reconciliation for it.
Well, it was only because the only thing the Democrats didn't like is that the tax cuts also applied to the rich, right?
Yeah.
It was across the board. That's the only part they didn't like about it. But all of this is disingenuous because there is no real tax cut. There is, in fact, a tax hike in the big, beautiful bill, because anything that results in the government spending more money is a tax hike, whether you want to call it that or not. And it doesn't matter what happens with the official taxes. If government is more expensive, the public has to pay for it. And if they're not going to pay for it with taxes, they're going to pay for it through inflation. The government's going to print money instead of collecting it. And it's going to make everything that you buy more expensive. And so the cost of living crisis that everybody is complaining about, it's the cost of government. That's what's happening. All of the extra costs of government are embedded in all these prices that you can no longer afford. And what Trump needed to do was cut the size of government, reduce government spending. I mean, he was elected in a way to do that with Doge and Elon Musk. But the problem is Donald Trump promised no cuts to Social Security, no cuts to Medicare, no cuts to defense. So all the big things he promised not to touch. But there's no way you're going to make government smaller without going after those massive entitlement
Peter,
programs.
You're outdated. It's not even that anymore. The labor HHS education was Biden levels, and the HUD bill was, I believe, $7.6 billion above Biden's final year. So even on the discretionary side, that's fallen by the wayside. So the one thing that he was excited about was the stock market, big tech, AI. So that was doing good. But I didn't understand how all year their valuations kept going up when we all knew it was circle jerk funding. They weren't producing any revenue to pay for it. And now PJM, the largest utility, tells us that there's going to be a 60 gigawatt power supply shortage over the next decade. So is Wall Street finally catching on? We saw Amazon go down 15%. Is Wall Street finally catching on that this whole thing is a farce? And do you see this year as AI stocks sort of breaking their bull run?
Yeah, I think we're going to see that. I think, the break in the crypto market, which is the most insane of the bubbles. But it is, a benchmark of what's happening with this kind of, raw speculation and the risk appetite for just, gambling. And so I think the fact that we've seen crypto crack first and Bitcoin, I think that's a leading indicator. We're going to see it happening in the AI, where companies aren't judged based on what they earn, but by their CapEx budget, how much they spend, and that should be what we should value you at. No, the spending is valued by whoever gets the money that you're spending, not the people who are paying it. But what really bothers me is the Trump administration blames all the inflation, all the problems on Biden. And the fact of the matter is, had Trump been reelected, he would have been just as big a spender, and the inflation would have been just as high. In fact, a lot of the inflation that showed up
it started earlier
was created when he was still president. You know, for the first year, all that inflation was Trumpflation. It wasn't even Biden inflation. But Trump wouldn't have done anything different. Judging by what he's doing now, there is no reason to believe that he wouldn't have been just as reckless had he been reelected. So it's very convenient that he can blame all these problems on how awful the economy was because of Biden.
Yeah, but here's what surprised me. So I thought he'd be saying, look at what Biden brought. It's going to take a while. You're going to have to be patient. You know, with Reagan, it took till the midterms, even beyond that. I thought that would be his strategy. But the problem is he's actually embracing this economy as his own anyway now. And he's saying it's good. I mean, you could lie to people that, you know, you're going to do something that's going to help, but you can never really tell them that when they can't afford anything, it's affordable.
Well, he's saying at the same time, yes, you know, things are still unaffordable, and that's Biden's fault, but the economy is booming and it's the greatest in the history of the world. Well, I mean, if it was that great, then people wouldn't be complaining about how they couldn't afford things. But he had to make the U.S. economy the greatest in the world the minute he took over. So it's like in December of 2024, we had the worst economy in the history of the world. Then just a couple of months later, it became the greatest economy in the history of the world. All because he just stepped into the White House. None of his policies had even come into effect. But it's all nonsense. The economy is, I think, weaker now than it was when Biden left office. We have more debt. The only thing you can point to is we've got the bigger GDP numbers. But those can be revised quite a bit lower. Who knows?
It's
But
all the CapEx.
So much of it is the CapEx, money we wasted on crypto industries. And it ignores the massive amount of debt that is going to overhang the economy in future years. So we've just pulled forward some of this GDP. And, you know, but all this is going to backfire because Trump, as you said, he owns this economy now, which means he gets blamed for all the bad stuff, which makes it easy for the Democrats because Trump is going to do what we know doesn't work. Trump's and the Republicans, their campaign plan is to lie to the public about how great the economy is. And we know the last three elections, the party that lied about how good the economy was lost. The reason that Trump won in 2016 was because he told the truth that the economy was bad, and Clinton tried to claim it was good. The reason he lost in 2020 was he said the economy was good, and Biden said it was bad. And the reason that Harris lost in 2024 was that she said it was good, and he said it was bad, right? So the incumbent party always loses when they try to lie to the voters about success that they don't have. So the Republicans,
you don't have the votes. Tell the public, here's what I want to do. Transactional gold accounts, repealing Obamacare, reducing the size of government. You know, all the things that we know would actually work across the board, small business tax cuts. But instead, he's just like, hey, this is great. So there's two more things I want to get to. The debt-based economy. So we have the record governmental debt. Then you have all the big tech debt. But then you have the private debt. And this is what really scares me. When this collapses and has the collapse begun, you now have the average family has 10,000 credit card debt per person, almost 60,000 student loans, an average of 242,000 in mortgages, and an average of about 23,000 in auto loans. Okay, is that debt-based runaway Ponzi scheme finally collapsing? And what does that look like?
Yeah,
for the
look,
individual?
the big problem with American debt is it's consumer debt or government debt. It's not debt that was incurred for productive purposes. There's a big difference. If a business borrows money to make a capital investment, and that capital investment increases the productivity of the business and generates income, and the income that is generated can now repay the debt, right? So that is a productive use of credit. You borrow money and you use the borrowed money to enhance productivity, and the investments that you made liquidate the debt. So the debt is self-funding. But we borrow to pay for goods. We, on credit cards, auto loans, student loans. And there is no asset that has been accumulated that can repay the debt. So how do you repay a debt when you didn't accumulate an asset, right? You can't. So it's like people don't have money to buy stuff, so they use a credit card. But now they're in even worse shape than before because they still don't have the money, but now they have more debt. And so eventually the whole thing has to implode, but you can't keep borrowing money because the minute you borrow it, you're in worse financial shape than you were before. And now you got to borrow more. I mean, if instead of borrowing to consume, if you saved and then consumed, you could actually consume more because you wouldn't have all this interest that you were paying. And in fact, you could earn interest on your savings. So you can actually consume more over a lifetime if you just waited before you bought and saved up. But because Americans don't wait, they just indulge immediately. Because we borrow so much to consume, we actually end up reducing what we can consume because now we have to pay so much in interest. And we're going to see that now on the government level because the government has borrowed so much that we're now spending 1.3 trillion a year just in interest on what we've already borrowed.
Plus about a third of the gross debt, public debt, maturing within the next year or so at higher rates. Could you explain to our audience what it means when, for example, just this week, the Treasury bought back $6 billion of its own debt? What does that mean?
Well, the maturity, and this started under Robert Rubin, where they started to shorten the average maturity of the national debt because doing that lowered the interest rate expense because people are willing to loan the government money at a lower rate if they get paid back sooner because there's less risk of inflation and less interest rate risk. But it's a negative for the U.S. in the long run because it leaves us exposed. In the short run, it does reduce our costs. So it's the same thing as a homeowner. You can opt for a variable mortgage or you can take a fixed rate mortgage. If you take a variable rate mortgage, it's generally cheaper the first year or the second year because, of the low rate, but you leave yourself vulnerable to rising rates. Whereas the prudent thing to do is to lock in a fixed rate that you can afford, and you don't have to worry about what happens to interest rates. Well, the U.S. government went for the variable rate because they only gave a shit about the short run. They didn't care about future administrations getting stuck with a big bill when interest rates rose. So we this is a ticking time bomb, and the debt keeps maturing, and we have to roll it over at higher and higher rates of interest, and so the whole thing is spiraling. I think by next year we'll be spending $2 trillion a year in interest on the national debt.
We have to because we're at this level without an official recession. But when we talk about all this consumer debt and they can't afford this, government's going to do what it always does, which, like you said, is to subsidize more unaffordability. They're going to have more, funding in Medicaid, unemployment, all this stuff, and it's going to be rinse and repeat. One more thing I want to get to is Bitcoin. You mentioned it briefly. In your view, okay, I know you've been warning about this for a long time. Everyone thought it'd be unstoppable, and now it collapsed. Did it just vomit out the excess grift of those that basically used it as a speculative asset, since sort of Trump's election, but the base level, maybe 50,000 worth, is real and will sustain? Or do you think the whole enterprise is going to collapse?
Well, I don't think there's any substance at all to Bitcoin. and pretty much the entire crypto industry. I mean, there's some stuff there, but it's a fraction of what the current, market value of the industry is and all the tokens. So I think that the main driver of the speculative demand for Bitcoin and crypto has been driven by the U.S. government. The government has gotten behind Bitcoin because it was paid by Bitcoin promoters. They helped elect Donald Trump. They gave him money. They gave him votes. And he actually created an entire family business. Trump is more involved in crypto than he is in real estate.
Wow.
And so he wants to use the presidency to enrich himself and his family. And investors recognize that, and they want to go along for the ride. So you have the U.S. government has basically made the decision to allocate capital to an industry that it decided it wants us to lead in, right? This is not capitalism. This is not the free market. This is not, people making decisions in a market. This is a central planner just saying, this is the industry that we're going to promote, that we want to back. And then people saying, okay, I want to be part of that, because obviously the playing field is going to be skewed in favor of this. And apart from the fact that the whole thing is a scam. and what really, really bothers me is that when it all collapses and everybody loses all their money, the government's going to be blaming capitalism. And they're going to be saying that, we need more protection. We have to protect consumers from scams like Bitcoin. Well, but the government helped perpetuate the scam. And the other actor was Wall Street. But I mean, Wall Street got in first with all the ETFs. But, I mean, they're willing to jump on any bandwagon. I mean, that's historically
and
how
Peter,
it works.
what really peeves me about this is that right away, they wanted to treat Bitcoin like a currency and absolve it of capital gains tax, treat it like a currency. But we're on 13 months so far, and I have not seen the executive order from the IRS to go and not tax transactional gold, which would really bolster currency. I know you're involved you have T-Gold at shiftgold.com.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons that they would never want to exempt Bitcoin from taxation, because if they did that, then I don't see how they could make it exclusive to Bitcoin. I think if they're going to say that if you use an alternative currency, I mean, they would have to say the same thing even about if you decide to use Swiss francs, that they're not going to charge a capital gain. And that would be very problematic, because everybody would then be using gold if that were the case.
Oh yeah.
And so it's not going to happen. They're not going to exempt the gains.
That's a real shame, because
but they should. Although I don't think we should have an income tax, period. So that would solve the problem if we just didn't have an income tax. And then it wouldn't matter. But the Trump, I mean, they set up this strategic Bitcoin reserve. And if you happen to, I was listening to the strategy call on X yesterday, and the very first slide that Saylor shows as to, why he believes Bitcoin is going to do well is Donald Trump and all the things that Trump has said he is committed to with respect to Bitcoin. And so they're using the president to say, this is why you should buy my stock, because the president is behind us. So how is that capitalism?
It's venture socialism.
The guy. And the funny thing is, when Kamala Harris talked about price controls on groceries, all the Republicans jumped all over her for being a socialist. But when Donald Trump wants to have price controls on credit card interest rates, nobody says a word.
That's another thing. I forgot about that mutual exclusive thing. I want all the debt and spending driving up inflation, zero interest rates. Hey, but why is there so much debt? People can't afford it, and why are credit card rates? I mean, it's just, look, don't we all want it all? I wish we could have a world like that, but that's not how the world was created. Look, Peter, it's maddening, and that's why I don't have too many people to bring on the show, because I had colleagues, like you said, December 2024, they would say all this stuff. Every time the fake CPI numbers would come out and they'd gaslight us like, oh, look, inflation's going down. It's the same thing. And then 3 minutes later, they're doing the same thing. It's like, do we believe our own talking points? I know I do. I know you do. And that's why, guys, you got to go to shiftgold.com to check out all the different investment opportunities, the T-Gold, and the various funds that you help run. You're obviously asset manager at Europe Pacific. Look, Peter, thanks so much for giving us so much time. Definitely keep us updated. So much more we left in the tank, but we're coming in on an hour.
Yeah.
Have a terrific weekend. Take care.
All right, take care.
So, folks, again, that was Peter Schiff. So much to go over there. Subsidizing unaffordability rather than making life more affordable. You can't get it all. Okay, you can't get it all in life. There's a give and take. But what is the fairest system for everyone is the free market that we frankly haven't had for a while, and in a severe degree since the great financial crisis. We've never really gotten out of that, and COVID, great reset, forget about it. It's a bipartisan uniparty on all this. Both parties do the same thing. They inveigh against the other party when they're out of power. There's only a few of us that actually want to be consistent and fulfill the mandate. So there aren't too many other people I could bring on like that. So certainly we appreciate him. Subscribe as always, like and subscribe at Horowitz Show on YouTube. Have a terrific family-oriented weekend till Monday. God bless you all. And Micah 6'8".